The music industry has lost a true legend. Quincy Jones passed this week at the age of 91, and what a storied career in music. He's done so many things, from producing Thriller with Michael Jackson, being one of the creators of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, being an artist, a producer. But one thing a lot of people don't know about is that Quincy Jones founded Vibe magazine. So I did a full deep dive onto Vibe magazine and the origin story in my book, Fashion Killa, How Hip-Hop Revolutionized High Fashion. And I thought to myself, it would be great to just share that story. I tweeted about it. It went viral on Twitter. A lot of people didn't realize he was the mastermind behind such an important and iconic hip-hop publication. So let's talk about it. Vibe magazine was the quintessential aspirational hip-hop publication. Just the covers, even the feel of the paper, it felt rich and luxe. It really was hip-hop told through this elevated and very holistic lens. Of course, those iconic covers. Who can forget Tupac on the cover, Biggie, the famous TLC cover. There were just so many great cultural moments that Vibe magazine not only documented, but originated. But what was so great about the magazine is when you would open up the pages, they covered music, but they also covered politics, sports, sex, relationships, things that were going on that were important to the hip hop fan. Unlike, let's say, The Source or Double XL, that were very much rooted in the music, Vibe was a cultural publication. And that was Quincy Jones's idea from the beginning. So as I said, I talk about the genesis of Vibe magazine in my book, Fashion Killa. And in the chapter titled, Don't Kill My Vibe, I talk about how Quincy Jones had this idea. His idea was to put together an aspirational hip-hop publication. What would have the feel of, let's say, a hip-hop Rolling Stone or a hip-hop Vogue? The story starts back in 1992. That's when the first test issue with Tretch came out, and you can see just from this image of that cover, like what an incredible cover. But let's go back to the inception of the publication. In my book, I talk about the origin story. So Quincy coming to Time Inc. with this idea. And one of the first things he did, which I think a lot of people don't know about, it was both controversial, but I think was very savvy at the time. He hired Jonathan Van Meter. Jonathan Van Meter was a young gay white man. I actually interviewed him for my book, and those are his words, like how he would describe himself. Jonathan came from fashion. He was covering celebrity. He was one of those people who was working in magazines, but not in the hip hop space. Now, your first response might be, that's kind of weird. Why would Quincy Jones, a man whose Rolodex really covered anyone, he could have gotten anyone to launch this magazine? But I think he was very intentional. He wanted someone who wasn't from hip hop, someone who could bring that high fashion lens, the pop culture lens, and bring it to this hip hop publication. And that's what Jonathan did. That first staff, it was people he knew from the fashion industry. I want to read this quote that Jonathan shared with me. He said, "I was able to explain to the powers that be hip hop and urban culture. The idea of a white gay man being the person that they chose is insane, right?" He says he was living this hip downtown lifestyle that Quincy really wanted to encapsulate. "I was also living a life of going out to clubs steeped in music. Every part of my existence, except for my work, was about partying and going to nightclubs and concerts. They saw me as the perfect mix of somebody who had the right kind of journalist chops and a deep understanding of some of the culture, not all of it." Now, he does say, looking back at it, "In today's climate, God, what a weird thing they did by hiring me." I'm sure a lot of people probably thought that was a very bold decision. It was probably something that ruffles some feathers. One thing about Quincy Jones, if you follow his moves, whether it be in music, Hollywood, television. He's always been very much a maverick. I'm sure when he was pitching ideas to Michael Jackson, when they were putting together Off the Wall or later Thriller, I'm sure some of those ideas seemed totally out of left field. Similarly, Quincy was instrumental in getting Will Smith to play the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Before that, he was a rapper. I'm sure a lot of those TV executives, the people behind the scenes, they didn't see the vision. So Quincy has always been just very much ahead of his time. So Jonathan Van Meter ends up hiring a lot of people he knows from the fashion world, such as Stephen Campbell, and it's people who are writers, editors, photographers. He was looking through the high fashion lens when he was launching Vibe magazine. And one thing that was really important to Quincy, as well as the people who launched the magazine, was that Vibe was a multicultural magazine. Of course, hip hop is a Black art form, Black culture, so it'll be steeped in that. But Quincy wanted from day one for this magazine to have appeal to a wider audience. So this is what Van Meter told me. My pitch was that this incredible moment is happening in music right now. Hip hop gives you an opportunity for a multicultural magazine. Shouldn't there be a magazine that is sort of like Vanity Fair for a new generation? And they were right. The hip hop generation was incredibly diverse. They would love Biggie and Tupac, but they might want to know what's going on in a high fashion runway. They may want an interview with a politician. It wasn't just looking at hip hop through this very narrow lens, which I think a lot of brands and even publications at the time, to be honest, even now, continue to do. So in 1992 was the first test issue with Tretch, and this was the one that the success of this issue ended up launching the magazine. And just look at it. It looks like a high fashion publication. It was shot by photographer Albert Watson, and it's shot in a way that's just so beautiful and luxe and sexy. If you walked by the newsstand and saw this, immediately your mind would say, this magazine has money, and they know how to shoot someone like Tretch in such a beautiful light. It's kind of an ongoing joke in the media. Sometimes you see the way photographers shoot Black people, brown people, like anyone who isn't white, and they just don't know how to do it. The lighting is bad, the hair and makeup is all wrong, but you can tell from day one, Vibe had that discernment. They wanted to show the people on the cover and in the magazine in the best light possible. So the first issue was a success. And from day one, these high fashion advertisers, people like the Calvin Kleins of the world, they signed on to be featured in Vibe. Back then in the magazine world, the way magazines made money was from subscriptions, from sales at the newsstand, but also advertisers. So the fact that Vibe magazine, a brand new magazine, is getting these A-list advertisers, I think that's a direct correlation to having Quincy Jones as the founder. He had so much respect and credibility in the industry, people wanted to sign up and be a part of everything he was doing. So that brings us to the official first issue of Vibe magazine. Snoop Dogg, back then Snoop Doggy Dogg, is on the cover. And in the same way as the Tretch cover, look how beautiful it is. This looks like a work of art. And if you compare this cover to even other covers Snoop was doing at the time, it's night and day. Vibe magazine stood out. It stood out aesthetically. Even the magazine itself, it was like bigger than other magazines. The paper was glossy, it was heavier. And then when you opened up the magazine, there was this great dedication to journalism. So many great writers and photographers and editors have come out of Vibe. You have people like Danielle Smith, Mimi Valdez, Kevin Powell. It really was the breeding ground for talent. But that's not to say that Vibe wasn't without controversy. One story I recount in the book is how in 1994, for the June-July issue, Madonna was supposed to be featured with Dennis Rodman. And this is what Quincy Jones said when he saw the photos from that cover shoot. He said, "Over my dead body." At the time, he felt that seeing Madonna, a white woman, on the cover with Dennis Rodman, a black man, would just be too controversial. It ended up causing this whole fight behind the scenes. Jonathan Van Meter ended up leaving, and then the next regime of Vibe took place. When you look at these covers now, by today's standards, they're actually really tame. But I could see that in 1994, this was sort of a step too far. And although Vibe was a multicultural publication, Quincy felt that there would just be too much backlash. The funny part of the story is, according to Van Meter, this is what really set off Madonna and Dennis Rodman's romantic relationship. You can see the chemistry just coming off of these covers. I mean, they're smoldering together. So it should be no surprise that after this shoot, they did end up hooking up and actually dating for a while. So that's just a little bit. If you want the rest of the story, you can see it in my book, Fashion Killa, How Hip-Hop Revolutionized High Fashion. But in honor of Quincy Jones, I just felt compelled to share this story. I mean, just RIP to the legend. This is a man whose career has spanned over 70 years. It truly is someone who is a once-in-a-lifetime talent. RIP Q, thank you for all of your incredible contributions. And for me, as a hip-hop journalist, somebody who grew up loving and reading and idolizing Vibe magazine, I gotta say thank you for that.